Hello and welcome back to another episode of Urban Informatics over coffee. This time round we'll be looking at turning contours into a site model in 3ds Max. So grab your coffee, grab your bicky, let's get started. We'll start with DataVic. We all love DataVic. It has a great source of free to access data, and that includes contours. So if we search contours, it comes up with more options than you probably would expect, but usually the first option is what you want. So this is VicMap elevation 1 to 5 contours in relief, and if you look at the description, it has 1 meter intervals, also 5 meter intervals highlighted. The one below it is 10 to 20, which would look at 10 meter intervals. So we know, well, I know that my site is pretty flat, so I'm going to want the 1 to 5 contour relief, and I'm going to want it in a DWG file so I can edit it in AutoCAD before importing it into 3ds Max. So if I go more information, go to resource, add it to order, I do find DataVic's website is a bit temperamental. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't work. Sometimes the download button or add to cart button just isn't there. So good luck with that. Hopefully this works now that I'm doing it live. So my cart has one thing in it, which is what I want. Choose your projection. You have to choose something. The GDA 2020 is pretty stock standard. We're going to say I want my DWG file, and then this warning comes up saying you can only order this data by locality. So if I select my map area and type in Footscray, and I'll apply this. If I wanted an area greater than Footscray, you can add a buffer to get just beyond the boundary of Footscray, which is good if your site is on the edge of a locality. So I'm just going to add my 1 kilometer buffer purely because it's the only option, and I will proceed to cut. Proceed to details, enter your details here, continue as guest. I always continue as guest. Who needs to remember a password? Not me. And then once you input all that, press confirm, and then DataVic will send you an email to whatever email you put in your email area, and it will send you a link to your data. So in the background, it has to process your request, and when it's done, it will email you. You should get an email confirmation first saying your order's in, and in theory, it should be relatively quick to then follow up with here's a link to your data. We are back. When we last left off, I downloaded the data from DataVic, and I was going to wait till it came through to continue with this video, but it never came through. So this is what I mean by temperamental DataVic. I gave up waiting for it and went through and ordered it again, and it came through straight away. So the moral of the story is, if it doesn't come through within the first 10 minutes, do it again and it might come through. Anyway, we're here. I've opened up what downloaded from DataVic, and you can see nothing, but I assure you it's probably there. So just zoom to extents, and then you'll be able to see what you've downloaded. So you can see the offset boundary from what has been downloaded, and all these lines are just the lines that have been brought over because they were inside the boundary. If I change the color of one of these layers just to see what we're looking at. So all the contours are on one layer and the boundaries on this layer, and I don't think there's anything on the base layer, and we want to be on the contour one. There we go. Is it 3D? Let's find out. The answer is yes, it is 3D, but it's not correct by any means. So you really just have to work on it as a top-down view, otherwise it won't make any sense. And yes, it is very annoying to edit, trust me. But we're going to work with what we've got here. You can see if I press on this contour, I don't know which contour it is. I don't know how high it's supposed to be. I don't know if anything's the right scale, and always check the scale, because when I did this last time, it was not quite correct in the X and Y axis. Definitely not correct in the Z axis, but the X and Y is what I was concerned with. To make this a bit more easier to deal with, I actually drew a square. I'm gonna do that now, around the area that I was interested in, and I made sure that there was no dead end lines within this square, because that'll probably fry someone's brain, if not the computer's brain. So I can't keep going this way because I've reached dead ends, but I can probably do that. That's probably a safe bet. And then I trim what I don't want away. I would recommend as well doing it in smaller groups because I have had instances where it crashes AutoCAD. But just going around the edges and trimming everything. And then we're going to delete everything else. Okay, so far, mostly so good. Some of these contours are quite strange. But first, I'm just going to join everything that remains. So just join, enter. And hopefully most of these lines that were separate lines are now one line. But as you can see, for example, this one doesn't quite join with this guy for whatever reason. As well, some lines just don't trim. So you might have to fix these ones that still stick around manually. Another issue with this data is some lines just come to a dead end, which contours, you can't have a contour that doesn't loop on itself. Like it can't come to a dead end. That doesn't make sense. So for example, there's 2 here, there's 1 here. I'm sure there's plenty more. Look, there's 1 here. Some of these could have been an error with my trimming and deleting because I did do it rather quickly. But when I was paying close attention to the first time I did this, there's definitely dead ends. And the way I fixed this was, honestly, I just added a polyline and drew it to where I thought it should go. So for this one, probably goes something like that. And then I would trim it again. So for all the dead ends, I would have to rationalize where they're supposed to be going or if some dead ends should attach to other dead ends. Very annoying. Like these 2 here are probably things that should connect to each other. So I would just do that. And because my model didn't have to be so accurate, I wasn't too concerned. And we're back to an issue I mentioned earlier where you don't know which lines are which. It's just the line. There's no information with that line. And to rectify this, I would open up VicPlan because this is the same data that's imported into VicPlan. And if you zoom in to where these contours are here, turn off all the stuff you don't want, turn on contours. So this is the data set that I downloaded, the 1 meter intervals with the 5 meter highlights. I'm also going to turn on just a grayscale. So you can see here the 5 meter is bolder and it has a 10 here and there's a 5 there. And to make sure I knew what I was looking at, I would have to literally join all these lines, join them together, and then I would pull the 5 meter ones and put them on their own layer to be a different color. So if I'm looking at this and I zoom into where it is here, you can see contour line 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 here. I would do the same here, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So I would select this and pull it onto a new layer, 5 meter, and I would give it a different color. Maybe purple, we like purple. And I'll put it on the 5 meter layer. So then it was more obvious where the contours were. You can also see these errors in the contours in VicPlan itself. If I try to find an error. So I found this line earlier that I fixed that came to a dead end. You can also see it comes to a dead end in VicPlan. So the moral of the story is you have to go to a lot of effort to clean up this data, make it readable, and then turn it into your model. Would I recommend doing it this way? No. Did I spend a lot of time doing it this way? Yes. So here's the one I worked on earlier in a different AutoCAD file. So you can see all my 5 meter intervals are on a different layer and they'll stay on a different layer when I import it into 3ds Max. You can also see I went to the effort of fixing up all the lines that went over the edge and also making sure all these lines were the same. Sometimes when you zoom into a line, I don't have an example on the screen anymore, but you would see that there was just a gap every now and again in the lines. Again, annoying to fix, but I did, and now I have a nice clean contour model with the Z-axis still super weird. I don't know what's going on there. I need the Victorian government to explain why it looks like that. After all that heartache, you import it into 3ds Max. And the way to do that is just select everything, type in the command W block and export it as a block. Save it somewhere, keep the units as meters, and just save, export, and then import it into 3ds Max. And here it is imported. You can see my 5 meter is green and everything else is blue, and you can see all my lines here. In this version, I have already fixed the contours, so you see they're all a meter apart now. And the way I did this, go back to top, is again referencing VicPlan to make sure I'm doing the right thing. I would select a line, right click on the move tool and choose the Z axis. So if the line was 1 meter in VicPlan, I would say it's 1 meter here. And I would have to do that for all the contours to make sure that weird Z axis import didn't affect my model. So after I did that, I had to fix the actual scale of the ground plane because it wasn't quite correct. So if I select everything and right click on the scale, I can change the scale of the contours to a specific axis. So if I wanted to stretch it in the X direction, I can change the value here, Y and Z, etc, etc. So if I wanted to stretch it and leave the Z alone, because I've just set it to the correct height of 1 meter intervals, I can change the X and the Y to be correct. And the way I worked out what percentage I needed to increase is I just did it pretty rudimentary. And I just chose something that was easy to measure in the model. So say the distance between the inside of this curve and the inside of this curve, which is Flemington Racecourse. So if I go to VicPlan and I look for those curves here and here, and to do that, you press on distance in the tools and you just double click where you want to start and double click where you want to end. So that's 626 meters. And I can measure the same distance here. Go to tools, measure distance, and just do that. And the distance is going to appear down here, which is 660 meters, and it was 626. So it's a bit off. And the way you do this is just do some simple math to work out what percentage you need to increase this by. So this is a bit big. So I'm going to assume I did the maths, and I'm just going to guess that this needs to be, say it needs to be 98% in the X direction and 98 in the Y direction. But you can see that my X axis is still at the right scale. One thing to note with this is if I change the scale to 98% and I click out and click back in and I want to decrease it by 2% again, and I type in 98, enter, 98, enter. Nothing happens because it's already at 98% the scale. 3ds Max remembers what 100% is. So if I wanted to decrease it a bit again, I would have to type in a new value and say 96. So now that you've brought your contours into 3ds Max, they're at a scale you're happy with, you've corrected the abomination that is the Vic data DWG file. In the next video, I'll show you the next step in this process of turning this into a mesh and then being able to make that mesh editable so you can manipulate it in freeform or with like a Boolean operation. But I'll save that for next time because just getting to this point was extremely painful. So we'll end on that depressing note and I'll see you in the next one.